A new term called gramnesia is helping parents and grandparents to better understand each other. Licensed therapist Dr. Ali Quaid defines it as the grandparent forgetting what it's like to have young children. They have amnesia of those early days of parenting. Grandmas are the best. We see all your strengths, and it's all too easy to forget what it's like to be in the trenches of parenting. So Studio 5 parenting contributor Heather Johnson is sharing 5 things for grandmas to remember so that connection can be limited this holiday season. Thanks for being here, Heather. This is something that is often a point of conflict between parents and grandparents.
Yeah, it can be. And it's a real thing, right? When we've gone through something, think of yourself going through something 20 years ago. It's easy to reframe it 20 years later. It's easy to see it a little bit different 20 years later. Even to forget some of the challenges so that we can look back fondly. We do those things too. I mean, I often equate it to having kids, right? Where you have a baby and luckily we forget maybe what it's like to have a baby, or else we might not have another one.
No.
It has a little bit of that feel to it.
It can hurt.
Right? It can. And it's unfortunate that we have to look at it as a negative. And I think that's what's so uncomfortable is we look at this and go, okay, well, grandmas have forgotten and so they can't relate. And we don't need to see it as such a negative thing. We all, 20 years later, forget about how things once were. And that's okay. It's okay that that happens.
Well, and I love that we're looking at this from both angles today. We're going to talk about things both sides need to remember. And we're first going to start with things grandmas can remember. And the first one is parenting has changed. And I see that every day.
It has. It's changed dramatically. One of the biggest ways that parenting has changed is that there is a huge emphasis now from parents on emotions and on opinions. It didn't used to be that way, right? 20 years ago, when grandmas and grandpas were parenting, there was this situation where children were seen and not heard, where we weren't talking about emotions. We surely weren't attending to them, right? It was get up, you're fine. Don't cry, it'll be okay. Stay quiet, you don't need to share your opinion here. I'm gonna tell you what to do. There was just more of that authoritative parenting going on. We don't do things that way. And so we've got to realize that grandmas aren't in a position where that's how they raised their kids in the first place, not for the most part. So this new, more gentle approach to parenting, it is new to grandmas. It's new to them. And grandmas need to remember that it's different now so that they can go into this space and instead of deciding that their grown children need to parent just how they did, they can go into this space and say, hey, I'm open-minded here. Things have changed. Teach me. Help me better understand, instead of, no, I'm going to stand up for it and defend how it used to be. It's really important for grandmas to remember that it's powerful to be teachable because things are different.
And both sides need to remember there might be something good from both types of parenting. And that's what you're saying is there are different types of parenting and not one of them is the end all be all.
Right. There are lots of ways to parent well. There are lots of good ways to parent. And we forget that. We tend to think the way we're doing it, especially if you're a grandma who found and felt successful in your parenting, that there is just one way. There are lots of right ways to parent. One of the ways I like to look at this is if we're comparing this to using Google Maps, right? Think of it like grandmas, grandpas, or grandparents, they started on this path with their families. They plugged in their destination into Google Maps and they started going. Well, while they were driving and raising their family, and now they have grown kids raising their grandchildren, some new information showed up. Just like when we're driving down the road, Google Maps says, well, there was an accident, or maybe there was some construction or some congestion. And so what does Google Maps do? It takes in that new information and oftentimes reroutes us. Now we get to the same destination. We are still connected and full of love and memories and experiences, but we got there a different way, but everybody gets there. And so to consider as grandmas, hey, there are lots of right ways to do this. And just because my grown children are taking a different path to get to the same destination doesn't mean it's wrong.
Doesn't mean it's wrong and doesn't mean it's against us, because I think that can be easy for grandmas to take it defensively and say, well, what, you didn't like the way I raised you?
Yeah, we do this all the time, and we do it as parents too, right? Not just grandmas, but grandmas and grandpas need to remember, grandparents need to consider that different doesn't mean we did it bad. And if our grown children parent different, it doesn't mean they're saying that they don't like what we did. Our grown children have to take into consideration that they're different than us, that they're married to spouses that have their own strengths and weaknesses and opinions and perspectives, that their children might be different than we were when we were children. And so considering that just because our kids raise kids differently, or, we're getting close to the holidays just because they do holidays different or don't carry on the exact same traditions. It doesn't mean that they're saying they didn't like what we did.
Yeah,
It's
and
okay.
and like you said, how we can learn as grandparents or older parents. The parents themselves are always learning and learning new things about how to parent.
Always learning. And isn't that cool? We forget that part. And it's easy to forget that over time. We forget it as parents with our children too. But grandmas need to remember that their grown children are learning every day. The fact that grandmas know what they know is a byproduct of them getting to learn over time. And we forget to afford grown children that same space, that they too are learning. They're trying to figure it out. They're having each new day show up. Even just that in the back of our minds to consider as a grandmother, hey, remember, my grown kids are learning every day too.
Yeah.
And giving them that space, right? And also realizing with them that it isn't about what we do. Grandmas need to remember that it isn't about what they do, it's about how they help or make their grandchildren feel, their grown children feel, and the kindness and love they give them. Especially with the holidays coming up, we tend to think, well, I'm not gonna be there, or I'm not gonna get to do gingerbread houses, or we're not gonna go see lights together. Instead of focusing on the activities themselves, grandmas wanna focus on infusing the love and kindness towards their grandchildren and their grown children. It's about how we feel with someone, not what we do with someone.
How we make them feel, too.
Absolutely. And so that helps a ton when grandmas can remember that.
And then, so on the flip side, what do parents need, the younger parents need to remember?
Yeah, so one of the biggest is we need to remember as parents that first, we are the gatekeepers. We get to control how open or closed the gate is between generations before us and after us. So we get to decide how open that's going to be for our parents, for grandparents to have relationships with our children. Our job is to keep that gate as open as we possibly can. We want to realize that grandmas aren't trying to be right. Grandmas just are hoping to matter. And we get this mixed up. Oftentimes, right, our parents will give us advice. They'll give us suggestions. They'll have thoughts. They might forget a little bit with that gramnesia, what it was like 20 years ago. They're not trying to tell us that they're right and know it all. Grandmas just want to matter. They want to know that the effort and the energy and the sacrifices and the love that they've shown and demonstrated, that it makes a difference, that all their years matter. So we want to remember that and be really great at letting them matter. It's important.
And you say to remember that those grandparents maybe not remembering every aspect of the being in the trenches it could be hopeful.
It can be. It doesn't have to be dismissive, right? When we have parents who maybe don't remember what it's like to be in the trenches where we might be right now, we don't have to see that as them being dismissive. We don't have to see that as them saying, you don't know what you're doing, or we had it better or harder. We don't have to decide that. We can have them come in with a little of that amnesia and decide that there's some hope in that they might be saying, hey, you can get through this.
Yeah.
Hey, look, there's another side to this. Hey, give it a couple years. Now might be hard, and I have a hard time relating now, but I can tell you that if you'll stick with it, there is great hope in 10. It's really great to recognize they might be providing some hope if we'll allow it to be hopeful.
I know I have twins, and so people with young twins always ask, does it get easier ever? And I'm like, when they're about 3. Like, I still remember it was really hard.
Yep.
And lastly, you say advice is not mandatory.
It's not. So we can, as grown children, we can hear advice from our parents or grandparents. It doesn't mean we have to take it, but we can be really respectful of the fact that they care enough to offer it, or that they take the time to share with us. It doesn't mean we have to take their advice. What we are responsible for, though, is being willing to understand and open to considering it. But from there, we get to make our own decisions. And isn't that great to think that we can have this advice coming from grandparents, from our parents towards us, and then we still get to make our own decisions as grown adults, as parents to our children.
And not a horrible idea to maybe chat with them about it and why you came to the decision you did.
Absolutely. We can have that communication, but we don't have to take their advice.
All right. Thank you, Heather. You can use Heather for counseling, and we'll have all of your information on our website. Thank you for being here.